I'd like to welcome you to the place. This is the place for intellectual, spiritual, and scriptural honesty, whatever that means. Tonight we are going to be discussing various topics. We are actually accepting comments and questions. And so the number to text into is 850-572-7441. And you can also put that on our stream, and that will actually give that to the people back in the control room. But we want to go ahead and get started with the show because we want to talk about this atheist monument situation, honey. It's going to be interesting to deal with that because I understand that people who have actually been on our show before, they actually did some things that might raise some questions.
A couple of gentlemen did, but before I'm gonna reserve judgment. On my show today, I said, "What are they, 5-year-olds?" But that might have been a little harsh, looking back in retrospect, as I have to do with myself quite a few times. But the very first atheist monument on government land at a courthouse was erected in Stark, Florida, and that's a very conservative, highly Christian community, and they won the right to have their monument there. And so I think all in all, everyone behaved, pretty seemingly nice, but there were a few instances where I think, I guess the little 5-year-old came out in some folks, as it does happen. And so we're going to talk about some of that. We have one of our own, Michael Fulford, was actually there at the scene. So we have an eyewitness here tonight.
Well, that's wonderful. Before we have Michael and Randy come on, I want to get Professor Bob Graves from Broome University on the show. Hello, Bob.
Hi, how are you?
Well, doing well. Your show was magnificent a few minutes ago. You did a wonderful job, and also the show that you did with Greg Bray was wonderful. We so enjoyed that.
Thank you.
I want you to jump in when you want. It's unfortunate you're not going to be able to see all the pictures that we will be seeing here in the studio, but Michael Fulford actually was there at this particular venue, and so we're going to go to him in just a minute and ask him some questions, get his comments about what actually took place, and have a chat. Before we get into that, what are your thoughts about these monuments? Monuments, an atheist monument, the Ten Commandments, and all of that, before we get started in the conversation?
Well, I have mixed feelings about it. There's a part of me that feels that any monument, as long as it's a non-issue, is a non-issue. I could care less whether it's religious, atheistic, or not. Personally, I just don't. I personally don't see any reason to care. If it's going to be an issue, I think that people need to be kind and thoughtful and sensitive. I think also they need to be tolerant. I'm a little bit puzzled, though, that what's the value in having a Christian monument or an atheist monument? Why not just have a monument? I have some mixed feelings. I'm not sure if it's potentially provocative. Although I would expect people to behave, I'm not surprised if they're provoked. But I'd like to. I know that this is the first monument, but they've got plans on many others, and I'm just curious to find out what the philosophy is behind putting up atheistic. And now, by atheistic, do they mean that there's just no God present in it, or is it obviously a monument that is going to somehow render the concept of being godless? I'm not that familiar with all of the monuments intended to be. So anyway, so it gives me a bunch of mixed feelings. I'm curious to see what happens. But any community in which these monuments might be placed up where there's no issue, I think the community has every right to put up any monument they want to put up.
Yeah. Michael and Randy, both of you guys are atheists and also from the Freethinkers Association, and we highly respect your movement and also your willingness to be here tonight and your honesty and your kindness and all of that. With that said, I think that Bob brings or is asking the right question. What's the purpose of this particular monument? Can you fill in the blanks for us?
Sure. Well, the purpose of the monument first was kind of as a counterbalance to the monument put up by the Christians, the Ten Commandments. The only, the real issue I have with it personally is I don't want any monument to be there. Or if it is a monument, it makes no claims to religion, period. In terms of what the monument is, it is an anti-religious monument. It does have several quotes in response to religious sentiment on it.
Can you give us a few of those quotes?
Yes, I can. They have a few of them. The first three are actually from the Founding Fathers. The first one is from Thomas Jefferson. This was in a letter from him to Peter Carr. Question with boldness even the existence of a God, because if there be one, he must more approve the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear. Then we have from John Adams, the second president, it will never be pretended that any persons employed in the service of writing the Constitution had interviews with the gods, or were in any degree under the inspiration of heaven. And this is from a defense of the Constitution. And this one is from Ben Franklin. When a religion is good, I conceive that it will support itself, and God does not take care to support, so that its professors are obliged to care for the help of the civil, and this is in the response to the civil government. It is a sign I apprehend at its being a bad one in terms of the quality of the religion. And this is in response to the many rules that have gone in place to protect the religious in the market of ideas. The last one was from Madalyn Murray O'Hair, the original American Atheist president. An atheist believes that a hospital should be built instead of a church. An atheist believes a deed must be done instead of a prayer said. An atheist strives for, I'm sorry, my handwriting is not very good. Okay. An atheist strives for involvement in life and not escape into death. He wants disease conquered, poverty banished, and war eliminated. It is important to remember that the donor determined the monuments that were going to be made and put in place. How much the American Atheists did have say in what quotes and how it was set up, but the intention was done by the donor who gave the money to have it as a counterbalance to the Christian monuments that have been put up at the various courthouses and all that, where they had the Ten Commandments put up.
Was it true that the American Atheist Association initially sued for their right to have the Christian monument, the Ten Commandments, taken down first, and the judge upheld the right for the Ten Commandments to be, to stand?
My understanding of the story is a little different. My understanding
Let's
was
turn that mic up. Hold on, Randy. Can we turn that mic up so I can hear Randy and Michael? Go ahead, Randy. It's so good to have you here tonight.
No,
Thank you for being here.
My understanding was that the original judgment was that the Christian organization which paid and donated the monument was instructed to remove it, and they refused. And the atheist group decided to, rather than force the city to pay to have this thing moved or anything like that, ask for just equal rights to be able to place their own monument, which I think was done very tastefully, very well. I think it reflects the atheist viewpoint without being provocative.
My view on the situation is I would like to see all of the monuments pertaining to the Ten Commandments taken down. I think it's a spurious reflection, namely of what we call the Old Testament writings in the first place, and to call them the Ten Commandments and attribute it to quote unquote the Bible, I think is quite failed. But that's another discussion. How would you guys feel about if a plaque was put up and replaced the Ten Commandments and it said love everyone? Would that offend anyone here?
No.
Me in
Not
it
at
would
all.
offend me in no way, shape, or form.
I mean, what if it came from 1 Corinthians chapter 13? Would that offend you?
That would be a tacit support of the Christian Bible, and that I would be against.
So
What-
are you against the premise of love is kind, love is patient, and love doesn't keep a record of wrongs? I mean, that would offend you?
The quote does not offend me, but it should not be, you should not have a biblical verse on
Why?
on private land. That to me violates.
I think
the-
it's an inference
Yeah.
that it gives it power. Comes from some sort of authority, that the biblical phrase is, a statement of authority and makes it more important. The meaning of the words that are said, love each other, something to that extent, doesn't need to have anybody's name attributed to it. I mean, a good, if
So,
somebody tells me to have a nice
well,
day, I'm
okay, but
happy
let-
no matter who they are.
But
saying
let's
it.
look at it like this. The Apostle Paul, if he were living today, I think he would be ashamed that he found his writings in the canon. I don't think that he would applaud the Bible at all. But let's look at the Apostle Paul alone. These are his words.
Like Thomas Jefferson,
Exactly.
Benjamin
And so
Franklin,
if this guy
John
was
Adams.
rising above his theology and moving on and moving forward, why would we be so afraid of using, say, a particular author like the Apostle Paul? Let's just call him Paul, because he wasn't for religion. He was a man who was rising and going beyond it. In fact, he told those people who went back into Judaism, the very religion that he was raised in, he said, "Who has bewitched you?" In other words, he would agree with atheists that people who are in religion, they have a spell cast on them. Something's crazy about their mind. And so I don't know why people would want to reject one author and accept another. That doesn't make sense to me.
It's because of his status. His status is not that as a founder or someone who had something to do with the secular law of the country. His whole persona comes to us from the religious, and the value of his words.
No, his
Yeah.
persona first came from who he was originally as an author, and people respected him for who he was. It was later on in history that he was made into this legend and taken way out of context and placed into a meta-language that I would say that is extremely failed. And so is it possible for us to think outside of the Bible and place these authors in their proper context and appreciate their work, much like we appreciate Aristotle and the rest of the guys?
It's a difficult one to answer. And when you talk about the Apostle Paul, I mean, why not say his real name, Saul of Tarsus?
Well, Saul was given on the 8th day. That would be to go back and say, well, let's give him his circumcision name, because he was called Paul before he was called Saul. And so when he was born, he was given the name Paulos. And so he never did receive that Shaul name until the day of circumcision. So he never goes by in the New Testament Shaul, except for Luke actually records him as being Shaul. Simply, he was trying to speak to that esoteric community. And so it was a bias that he was trying to speak to. But Paul never does say, let me talk about my baggage, let me talk to you from a theological perspective. He never does do that. He speaks as one being completely born from Tarsus. I'm Paul. He never does try to attribute anything to Judaism. And in fact, he leaves that mindset. And this is the thing that, we should appreciate, people rising above the traditional models and moving into something that's perceivably good. In other words, he talked about moving from faith to faith, and the idea that he uses concerning pistis, which would be the Greek term there, he's talking about moving from one body of truth to another, very much like science. And so if Paul is right, and he was very much a person in transition, a person who advocated transition, why would it be wrong to say, hey, this man, a man who is actually a leader, trying to lead people away from religion, why would not the atheists applaud such a man like this?
The issue I have is that the use of his words on a public building would be taken by the Christians as support of the idea of of the U.S. as a Christian nation.
But the Christians
you're-
take
You're assuming that.
the Christians take all kinds of people out of context. Go for it, Bob.
The way that people take things is something that I personally believe we've got to stop catering to. If people are going to take
Exactly.
something wrong, we're just going to have to let them take it wrong. And I don't think that it's ever wise to do something or to not do something just because of the way somebody might take it wrong. I think we need to be sensitive to the ways that people might take something wrong, and we certainly don't need to deliberately stir the thing. But if somebody's going to see a biblical quote about love and think that this somehow establishes religion, to me, that's just too damn bad that they're going to think that way.
Exactly.
And if some are going to think that way, they're just going to have to think that way. Let them. It doesn't do anything to or against anybody, as far as I can tell. But then again, I remember when we talked to David Silverman, he certainly spoke about ways in which, religious privilege can work. And I suppose I would want to be concerned about that, but I really don't want to start coming up with rules. And I'll tell you something that I do think. I think that in this country we have a bunch of nonsense about what separation of church and state does and does not mean. And I think that a lot of people, both Christians and atheists, can be extremely ignorant of the history of what separation of church and state really means, and how that philosophy came about, and what the world was like before that philosophy came about, and how the United States of America has never once in its entire history ever experienced one violation of separation of church and state, ever, based on the Constitution. Although there has been plenty of commingling, the separation of church and state that we have in America is the separation of church and state that involves ex officio. It used to be, the head of the church and the head of the country was the same guy, by virtue of the fact that it's the guy. And there was a time in European countries where the church had such power within the government that the local sheriffs would be appointed by the local bishop. And by the bishop had the power to appoint the local sheriff. In America, if you want to be a minister, you're going to have to go to school or do something to be credentialed as a minister. If you want to become a senator, you're going to have to run for election and be elected. If you want to be both, there's nothing to forbid you from doing both, but you cannot be both by virtue of being one or the other. You have to be both by meeting the obligations of both. Nobody is an ex officio authority in church government and in secular government by virtue of having one post. Nobody is. And that is a separation of church and state that was unique in the days that the United States of America came about for Western countries. And that is the separation of church and state that we have. The philosophy of separation of church and state went much farther. There were people such as Jefferson who really subscribed to a stronger philosophy of separation of church and state, and not all of those ideas prevailed, even though they were held onto by many of the founding fathers. When it came time to write the Constitution, they tried to find some sort of a balance where there would be the establishment of religion was an organization, not a verb. That was not a verb phrase. It wasn't, it was meant that we can't, things that are already establishments of religion, or establishments like, you have a hotel establishment. We can't have, the Congress can't pass any law regarding an establishment of religion. That means they can't pass laws that tell the Presbyterian Church how to ordain people, because that establishment of religion is independent in its own affairs from the government. But that doesn't mean that the government can't pass laws that might have an influence on religion. that's not what it forbids. The establishment of religion had to do, that was a noun phrase. It was not a verb phrase. It was not talking about doing something that tends to establish it. It was talking about establishments of religion, you know.
You're talking about like the Church of England as an example.
Right. The churches in America determine their own affairs. The government in America determines its own affairs. And if they have any influence on each other, they have influence on each other, and that's just the way that it is. And because there's no way that you can expect a person who isn't religious to lose their government rights, but you can't also expect somebody that, because by virtue of the fact that they have religious ideas, that they lose their citizen rights in any manner. You know, so I do think that we need to, personally, I think we need to clarify what we mean by separation of church and state. Now, personally, the other thing I wanted to say, and I realize it's taking a lot of time here, is that balance can be a difficult thing to achieve. There are some times when balance can be brought by doing something on the other side of the equation. But there are some times when you can't bring balance. For example, if you have one parent who's overly strict, you can't have the other parent bring balance by being overly liberal. That'll screw the kid up worse. If you have a parent who's kind of off kilter by being either overly strict or overly permissive, the best thing the other parent can be is to walk a balanced line themselves, to be strict enough and permissive enough to balance it out. And I think that this is one of those situations. I wouldn't be the least bit opposed to some sort of a monument put on government property that represented the various different religious views of our founding fathers, including those who loved Jesus and those who couldn't stand religion, to have them both there and to honor the fact that these people of different views on religion came together and founded our country. To me, that would be an awesome monument. I think it would be wonderful.
Yeah.
You know?
Personally, I feel that that's more of what the atheist monument is than the Christian monument. The atheist monument reflects different points of view. Yes, they are non-religious points of view, but there's more diversity in the beliefs reflected on that monument than there are on the Christian Ten Commandments.
Yeah, I would certainly
Yeah.
agree with that.
And
I would
the
too.
issue I have too is you were speaking as to separation of church and state and how it's not been violated. What was the original motto of the United States?
The original model,
Motto,
we were
yeah.
a colony of England, and of course, the districts were broken up into various different areas where the Anglican Church had jurisdiction in some areas, and other people for religious freedom came over here, and so you had Methodist and Quaker positions, and you had the Rhode Island was a Baptist
Right.
state. And so people came over here for religious freedom, but they all had territories that were designated with certain established religions there. After we finally came up with our current Constitution, that was done away with.
Right. But what I asked was, do you remember what the original motto of the United States was?
The motto, the phrase.
The original motto? No, I don't.
E pluribus unum, out of many
I-
one.
Right.
In the
yeah,
1950s,
okay,
it
that's
was
right.
changed into In God We Trust.
Which was not a good idea.
And the claim was that no one, it just says God, it doesn't speak to anyone. Obviously, I don't believe in God. That does not represent me. And, if you're a Muslim, God is Allah. If you're a Jew, it's Yahweh or Jehovah. Can't keep those straight anymore. But I've read all this, and I'm sorry, it doesn't stick in my brain as much as it used to. But my point is that it doesn't accurately represent the people of the United States. It has
In
gone.
God We Trust does not. I agree.
And
How did they do that? I mean, not just from the standpoint of separation of church and state, but how did they do that? How did they justify even doing that?
I've heard-
Particularly Pluribus Unum was awesome.
Yes.
I've heard two different things. One was the claim that we were fighting the communists at the time, the godless communists, and to show that we are a Christian
Right,
nation.
Right.
The other is simply that the U.S. was a majority Christian nation at the time, and no one had a problem with it. Of course, if you did speak out against it, you'd be labeled a communist.
Or beaten half to death like Madeline Murray O'Hare.
Yeah, and her mother.
I have a clue as to why we have "In God We Trust" on coins, etc. And I think that I can make a point if Sean would be so kind as to put up our first photo. And I want us to look at this photo. And this is actually one of the guests that we had on our show. This is actually Eric Hovind. He's standing on top of this atheist monument in Stark, Florida. And he's actually preaching from that atheist monument. And Michael, you were there, so can you tell us what's going on with this pic?
Well, he initially thanked everybody for giving Christians a platform from which to preach. He did jump up on top of it. I'm very glad he didn't slip. The stone was definitely slick. He did preach at people, interrupting what had been going on. A fairly nice ceremony where people were able to get their picture taken with David Silverman and kind of interact and, kind of this ceremony of, hey, we've got something done kind of thing.
Now, did he start this out by just, walking up to it and getting on top of this, and that's how the event started? Or maybe we can back up a little bit. Why did he get up there? Was he encouraged to do so, or was this the first thing that he did?
No, the first thing he did was he was going around the audience interviewing people who were not familiar with what he does, with the presuppositionalist argument, and tried to explain to people what he was trying to do. He did seem, as far as I know, he did see me there and seemed to pointedly ignore me, which I don't have a problem with. But him and Cy Bruggencate and others were going around the audience, won't say bothering people, they seemed to enjoy discussing with them. When the monument was finally unveiled and David Silverman was getting his picture taken with the monument sitting on it, he went up to it and started talking, and then...
So David Silverman was getting his picture taken while sitting on it, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And this was also going on where people were sitting next to David Silverman and getting their picture taken with him and the monument. And then he came over, started saying how grateful he was that they had provided a platform from which to preach, and then he jumped up on top of it and started preaching.
So are you saying that David Silverman was actually sitting on the bench part of it
Right.
when Eric Hovind jumped up? So you have Eric Hovind on the actual, vertical monument, and then David Silverman was sitting on the bench at the same
Yes.
time?
Yeah.
That
Can you
was
show the picture one more time?
So yeah, let's look at the
Yeah,
picture.
that's
So
him.
David Silverman was sitting on the bench. He
He's
was
in the
not
blue
sitting.
shirt.
He is in the blue shirt.
Okay,
yeah.
he's not. David Silverman was never sitting on top of the monument
No.
where Eric Hovind's feet are. Is that
No,
correct?
because it's not a
Okay.
bench. It's not a place
I'm just trying to find
stand.
out,
I know.
what's being stated here, because
I'm sorry.
to me, it's I'm not a Christian, but I'm certainly a theist, and I find this to be extremely disrespectful.
Yeah.
And it seems like if you're going to present something in the public eye and be ever so kind, and David Silverman, when he was on our show, he was such a kind individual, and we loved having him on the show. And it's rather strange that David Silverman, Cy Ten Bruggencate, and also Eric Hovind were on the same show on a Sunday night, and that's kind of ironic,
Yeah.
but a side point.
And I do
But-
want to make the point, too, that when Eric went to get off the monument, David made sure to extend his hand and help him down, even after
Awesome.
getting up and almost making a fool of himself while he was up there. No one listened
Now-
to him while he was preaching.
Now,
How-
did David reciprocate by standing on the Ten Commandment monument?
Yeah, after Eric got up, or it was either Eric or Cy had gotten up and was preaching about the monument, he did jump over on the base of the Ten Commandments, which is on the screen now.
Okay, now this is David Silverman standing on the Ten Commandments.
The Christian monument.
Right, the Christian.
And Eric stood
Yeah.
on the atheist monument.
Yeah, that was in response to the behavior of Eric. Hovind.
Okay,
And
now-
that's what I said, like,
Yeah.
what are they, 5 years old?
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Okay, but let's back up a little bit, and I want to know the sequence of events. We have Eric Hovind on top of this atheist monument. He's preaching hellfire and brimstone, is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay. And does he ask people to repent or tell people to repent?
he does.
He does. And when did this other happening of Cy Ten Bruggencate and the toilet seat? Because it seems like Cy Ten Bruggencate is trying to pull a toilet seat away from some atheist or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the same one, but as I understand it is. I didn't see him go to pick it up. Someone threw a toilet seat at us while the
At
the
whom?
event was going on.
At the
At
crowd?
the group of atheists.
And a roll of toilet tissue, I
And
believe.
a
Through
yeah,
a
roll of
toilet seat. That's
Yes.
it.
So you
That's-
guys were standing out there with toilet seat being thrown and possibly more than one toilet seat.
Right.
This is taking my breath away, Bob. I mean,
Now-
you should see Cy Ten Bruggencate pulling on that toilet seat. That's
I'm looking at it.
impressive.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
see it.
I'll tell you, the fact that there is both the Ten Commandments and this other monument there, to me, that's balance. And that's fine. I'm totally
Yeah.
comfortable with that personally.
Well, I can say that
I-
the atheist monument is directly opposed to the Ten Commandments. One of the things it lists on the side facing the Ten Commandment display it does list all 10 of the punishments that were to be meted out for breaking the Ten Commandments,
Huh.
which
8
each
of
is
which are death, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that I can see why that would be met with an antagonistic reception, but the point of American Atheist in this response was to be antagonistic. That's their style. That's not when I don't support it myself, but I understand why they do it. It does get the media involved, does get people paying attention when a more friendly interaction doesn't do the job. And I can
Right.
understand, and I do want to say too, that there were Christians in the audience who were supportive of the monument going up. Before we get too far into this, there were people who were Christian, who were fully in support of the monument going up, who were there in attendance.
Now, there's another gentleman holding a sign, and I want us to throw that picture up. Would you do that, Sean? And I can't, if we can shift that picture over a little bit, but I want my wife to read that if she can. It's hard for me to see it.
If you don't like our Christian culture, go back home. That's the Florida League of the South.
If you don't like our Christian culture, go back home. Where in
Only
hell
in the
do they want
South,
us to go?
folks. Only in the South.
I don't get it. What did that mean to you, Michael?
Well, I was a bit confused. I was born here. I wasn't really sure where I was supposed to go. And I did go and talk with one of the fellows who was there, and he was telling me it was only directed to the people from New Jersey. And
Well, I can understand. No, I'm just
Yeah.
joking. Just joking. No.
But-
Well, no, wait. No,
Yeah.
no. Tell them why it was directed to the people from New Jersey.
Well, American Atheist is based out of New Jersey.
Right.
And that's what they were speaking to.
Yeah, it wasn't the normal, North against South. It was the.
Well, it was.
Christ-
They also
Well-
said Yankees go home.
Now,
Oh, did they?
you know,
I'm
Yeah.
so sorry. I
Yeah.
hate to hear that.
the fact that American atheists are based in New Jersey, I suppose you have to have a headquarters somewhere, you know. And does anybody think that just because their headquarters is in New Jersey that they somehow don't represent atheists? You know.
Yeah, they did actually. While speaking with them, I asked, "Do you realize that most of the people here in attendance are local, and that American Atheist has a local chapter, and that many of the people there were from it?" And I don't believe that. You can ask. You can go and ask them. He didn't want to do that either.
I also heard that I guess some good old boys came by blaring some. I don't know if it was honky tonk Christian music or
Yeah.
what kind of was it? Just country music?
It
or-
was Christian and country music,
Christian
and I got
and-
to say, as someone who enjoys Christian and country music, it wasn't even good Christian and country music. Yeah, I actually had a kind of a problem with those folks. They were blaring it to try to override what the speakers were saying, and the people who were their
That's
intent is
rude.
to annoy them.
That's
They also had-
embarrassing.
That's-
That's
that's
embarrassing.
They
terribly
also
rude.
had signs that said "honk if you love Jesus." Some of them were misspelled, which made some people laugh. The other issue, but the issue I had with them was one of the women who were out there, very young, younger than I am, was obviously pregnant. During the program, once the initial thing was over, I went to bring her a chair because if she's out protesting, there's no reason she needs to be any more uncomfortable. And I could see when I went to offer the chair that she was relieved. That might be just because, oh, there's an atheist. I don't know. But as soon as I went to offer the chair, her mother came over and completely shut me down and made me go away, which... And my thing was, hey, we're both, at least we can agree to decrease some human suffering. You don't have to be any more uncomfortable while you're out protesting. And apparently she disagreed with me. And the other thing, too, is that the men were in the trucks with the AC and drinking beer while the women were out with their signs, "Honk for Jesus." So.
Randy, what are your thoughts?
I'm actually relatively new to being a full-out atheist. I've had my doubts most of my life. But I actually tried, everything, been baptized. I, read the Bible. I did everything I could to try to understand it because I was so surrounded by it and indoctrinated by it. I felt like there was something wrong with me that I didn't believe. And I think that is what the problem is that just immersion in that causes these people to think that's the only thing that they know. And all of a sudden, somebody who is an atheist, they're being told that we are just the spawn of Satan. We are the most awful, evil people in the world. The atheist didn't throw items at the others. The atheist didn't cause any conflict. Now, I'm not saying that all atheists are perfect, because I was just watching a video earlier today of an atheist who made a complete fool of himself, talking to a Christian person. Nobody's perfect, but I think in general that we are taken as being, something evil, something horrible, something terrible. We're people. We have our morals. We believe in doing the right thing. We don't do the right thing because we're afraid we're going to be punished because we do the wrong thing. We do the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
That's awesome.
And
That's
I do
awesome.
want to say the reason,
Yeah.
the reason why I'm against any kind of a religious monument, period, religious, atheist, Christian, whatever, outside of a courthouse is because, while I love the marketplace of ideas, a courthouse is not the place to have this kind of battle. When a person is going to a courthouse, they're seeking justice. They're not trying to be in this war of ideas, are you Christian or are you atheist?
Right.
The courthouse should not be asking, are you Christian, are you an atheist, are you a Muslim, are you a Jew?
Right.
You should be
So-
going in there with the expectation of being treated as a citizen,
Yes.
regardless of whatever affiliation you may have.
Yeah, I could see this outside of, say, a legislation of, building where you had atheist monuments and Christian monuments, maybe Hindu. Where ideas are considered, I could see how each of those ideas being represented could be a useful monument. But at a courthouse, I agree. I never understood all those. In the past, the monuments, particularly the Ten Commandments at a courthouse. And what was it? Was it George Carlin who said, you can't have these religious Ten Commandments monuments around places where you have politicians because it creates a hostile working
Yeah,
environment.
thou shalt not lie, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Right. I think the only thing that should be erected at a courthouse is the, Lady Justice with the blindfold and the scales.
Yeah.
Because, that's what everybody needs
It's
to
a
go in there on
symbol.
equal footing. Right.
Yeah.
That's right. That makes a good statement.
I would argue that one of the things that I would like to see in the justice system, and this is an argument that we need to take to the courthouse, not necessarily erect at the courthouse. I think that our justice system needs a concept of love and kindness and patience, learning how to deal with people as human beings, because I think that our justice system has been built upon models that were extremely mean-spirited, in a sense. And so we do have judges who feel as if they want to carry out the letter of the quote-unquote letter of the law, the Mosaic law, in a sense. And, many judges here in Pensacola, you can tell that their judgment is Bible-based instead of according to law. And that really is disappointing. And that's an argument that we need to get into when, having judges like that. When people make these harsh and critical judgments without considering how to treat people in a humane way, is my point.
As a side note, on my show, Reflections, we've been talking about women who kill their children, filicide in the name of religion. And that being said, the statistics are this, that when a woman kills her child, she is handled more leniently by the courts and judges and jurors than a man is who would kill in the same manner. And so...
Except in Texas.
Exactly. And honestly, and this is going to sound really bad, but most of the women that we've researched, they come from Texas. They homeschool their children. They are under the teaching of a almost cultic leader. I mean, there's so many similarities to, you can almost just diagnose them by, where they're from, what they're doing, who they're sitting under for teaching, and it's sad. It really is. Really is. But you're right about Texas.
Randy caught my ear a few minutes ago. He was saying that, if I'm not misunderstanding you, you're new to being an atheist. Is that correct?
I'm new to pronouncing it. I'm a big fan of the magicians, comedians, Penn and Teller. Penn Jillette, he has a book called God No, where he talks about atheism, and in his description of an atheist, it's anyone who really can't say, if you say, is there a God? If they can't say absolutely yes, then they're an atheist. And so in that light, I've always been an atheist, because I've never been able to say with any kind of certainty that there is a God. But I've, only within the past 5 to 10 years come to the point in my life where there's just no longer any doubt. Just finally really, understanding that and knowing that I'm not, there's not something wrong with me because I don't understand something that makes no sense whatsoever.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. What kind of theological background did you come from?
Actually, quite a mix. My family, my mom was Methodist. There was a lot of Catholicism in the town that we lived in. I've lived all over the place, but generally most of the religious background is from this one particular area in northeastern Pennsylvania. I've actually explored Mormonism. I attended a Mormon temple or a Mormon church for a while, thinking that, okay, everything I've heard so far doesn't make any sense. Maybe this makes a little bit more, but unfortunately it didn't. I've done a lot of, reading on, the Talmud and things like that, the Torah, trying to understand, and just not any of it makes any sense. It's all mysticism, it's all magical thinking, and I can't get a handle on any of it. So somebody's got to be right, somebody's got to be wrong. I think there's a pretty good chance that most of them are wrong. I'm not saying that I'm right.
I just that all of them are, but
Go ahead,
that may be
Bob.
something absolute that I'm missing too. I'm not professing to be
I'd say
absolutely
there's a
right
pretty good
about
chance
my
that
belief.
all of them are wrong. Now I'm a theist, but in a sense my theism is not based upon a concept that I feel I know who God is and I know how this works, any more than like in the relationship I have with my wife. I'm familiar with her, but I would think it inappropriate of me to approach the relationship I have with my wife by saying, I know you. I know who you are. I know how you think. I know what you like. I know what you don't like, and I can totally represent who you are to other people. I
Well, any
can't
man
do
that thinks he
that.
knows the mind of a woman is obviously mistaken.
Right, and there's a sense in which my belief in God is I have no problem recognizing that my theology is merely a working model of a God he's got to be other than what we've conceived him to be. But so to me, when religion gets so dogmatic that we think, oh, I got him nailed down, that's absurd to me, and I wonder how many people who become atheists as a result of recognizing that there's not a single one of these authoritative dogmatic claims out there that possess any sort of credibility.
I so agree. Let me change the subject just a bit.
Well, can we show the picture of Michael Fulford at the event? I mean,
I was going to come back to it, but
okay,
let's go ahead and
okay,
show the
okay.
picture.
I thought you
Let's-
were going to leave the topic. Sorry.
I'm going to leave the topic, but I want to go somewhere else and
Okay.
come back. But let's show the picture real quick.
And one thing, you see the cones in the police line. The reason why that's there is there was a feeling that Cy and Eric jumping on it had caused some damage. That's not what happened. What actually happened is the sealant had not cured yet. So there was no damage done to the monument. There was a little slipping, but no actual damage.
So are you saying that Cy,
Did he christen it with the?
so are you saying that Cy
let's see.
actually got on it as well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right,
Wow.
that's.
Is
good
it
to know.
lawful to get on a monument like this?
I don't know. I've never really come across a case where someone did something like that and has been arrested.
It's public property
It's-
now, right?
Yeah, it's definitely rude during a ceremony like that to do that. But I don't know that it's illegal necessarily.
Do you think that David Silverman was rude as well?
Silverman was responding to their actions.
But was it rude?
But was it rude?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
what I'm. He was responding to their behavior. I do kind of.
That's a tough one.
With the picture, you don't also get what he said, and with that, yeah, that's kind of a rude. He was being rude, responding to rudeness.
That's a tough thing, because I think that when you've been dealt, when someone's behaving towards you rudely, you do need to make a decision. Do I ignore this? Do I come up with some sort of a response? And let's be honest, I don't know that any of us in the moment can always come up with what's going to end up being, oh, that was the most brilliant and workable response. I doubt that David Silverman would have gotten up on top of that monument had it not been in response to what had happened. And so there's a sense in which if there was some foolishness in that, I can understand that foolishness with a lot more tolerance than I can understand the foolishness of Eric Hovind getting up on top of a monument where he's grandstanding and interrupting something that is somebody else's day.
Right.
He's interrupting. This is
Right.
their parade.
Yeah,
Sure.
this was a big achievement for
Right.
American atheists.
Agree.
Right.
Yes.
And obviously, I mean, the seal wasn't even sealed,
Yeah.
so that, I mean, it could have caused damage. I mean, that would have been very much destroying
Yeah,
property,
and he should know the
private
problem
property.
of breaking seals. You never know what might happen if a seal is broken.
Were there 7 of them?
That's good.
Now, while you were out there, could you see that this was stimulating ignorant people to some type of protest or whatever?
Yeah. The Florida League of the South were there. They were obviously not, they have a very, I'm trying to be political here. They had a very narrow approach to what the other people were there for. To the point, they are fairly well known in the area, and the other protesters there who were Christian wanted it very apparent that they were not at all associated with the Florida League of the South. Anyone from the South is probably familiar with the phrase, it's heritage, not hate, or some variant of it.
Mm.
Hmm.
So,
Let me shift the topic just for a moment, and we'll come back to this topic in a minute. I've been trying my best to let people know, and I think this is possibly a concern of you guys. I've been trying to let people know that homosexuality is not a sin. And I think that you guys would embrace that. It's not a sin. It's not wrong. When I presented this, not to Catholics, because I understand that Catholics are going to react in a rude way, and I understand that
depends on the
Protestants
Catholics.
will react the same way. But my point is, I approach some Universalists because the Universalist movement claims to be all-inclusive in a sense, loving everyone unconditionally and sometimes accepting people unconditionally. But when I simply made the statement in one particular group, well, not just one group, but several, that homosexuality isn't a sin, it was like I was at some revival somewhere where people were just chanting all kinds of passages of the Bible and just really making remarks like, what are you going to do? Are you going to advocate that having sex with a cow is right? And things of that nature. And my question, first of all, goes to Bob. Why do theists get so stupid when you simply make a statement about homosexuality not being a sin? And when they asked me why I thought it wasn't a sin, I said I don't really have time to deal with it, but I will say that Dr. Ann Nyland, now she's not a theologian, but she did translate the New Testament back in 2004 and published it, and it's a wonderful work. And her qualifications are in producing lexicons. In other words,
Right.
She's the one who deals with these semantic domain fields. She's a specialist, a highly regarded individual. And I simply said, well, look at Dr. Ann Nyland's work. It's wonderful. It's known as a Bible that's very friendly to the homosexual community, and she's putting forth one of the better reconstruction models of the Bible. And she doesn't even believe that a person needs to be saved, thank God. And so my point is, she puts out a work, and I said, why don't you guys read this Bible, that is this New Testament, put out by a genuine scholar? And these people started asking me questions. Well, we need more sources. I said, well, why don't you contact Bruce Metzger, because he has the same idea. And Bruce Metzger, he was the top textual critic, and Dr.
He's the
Bart
crowning
Edelman
jewel of the textual
exactly
criticism. Yeah.
took his place. And then I pointed also to Kurt and Barbara Allen. Kurt has died not too long ago, several years ago actually, but his position was the same as Dr. Ann Nyland. And I talked about Nestle's work and all of these different people, and I even said, haven't you ever heard of the Nestle Allen edition? It's
Right.
in its 28th edition right now, and I said, these guys are not novices. And even though I cited at least 12 to 15 different scholars, and I'm talking about linguists, I'm talking about people who actually know what they're talking about, who would say that there is no evidence in any of the Old Testament or in the New Testament that actually deals with the idea of homosexuality in the context of being sin. And yet, these universalists basically were extremely sarcastic toward me, saying that I was becoming a stumbling block for people, and I was going to cause people to sin and fall short of the glory of God, yada, yada, yada. And my question to you, Bob, is why is that still going on even among people in the Universalist movement?
I can't really speak for them that well, except that there's a sense in which I'm a part of that community, but I think they've painted themselves into a corner where they've accepted a particular translating model that they're actually not even educated about. It's not that they have a model that they defend. They're not even aware of what its potential problems might be, or why other scholars would disagree with it. So it's a position of tradition and complete ignorance, as far as I'm aware. I mean, I myself, I went to, I originally went to Bob Jones University. I was, I began to learn Greek in a fundamentalist context. And by the way, we used the USB fourth edition, which was at that time identical pretty much to the 23rd edition of the Nessel Allen text, when I began to study linguistics and I began to realize how much of what I was being taught that had real scholarship behind it flew in the face of it, I began to discover how absolutely ignorant I was. And not just in a matter of opinion, but in demonstrable ways, So I think that they've painted themselves into a corner. They've founded their faith on what they believe to be is a particular authority, and anything that chips away at that authority is to them perceived as a threat. And since the traditional translation models do translate certain sections like Romans chapter 1 and various other places where 1 Corinthians chapter 6, where homosexuality is brought into the translations, and even in the Old Testament when it's talking about the evil that was done in Egypt, and don't do the same things in your country, where even an allusion there to homosexuality is brought. They're not interested in talking about anything that might be a more scholarly view of the text, what it was saying, how these words were used, where they come from, or even how the tradition that these were allusions to or references to homosexuality, they're not really interested in knowing what that history is. So they've painted themselves into a corner. They are, in my opinion, ignorant. And I'll tell you, I got to be honest with you, sometimes it angers me. It angers me that they have the gall to call themselves lovers of truth, and they're not the least bit interested in knowing what the truth is concerning the text they consider to be the Word of God. So, it just boggles my mind, and sometimes I got to be honest, it irritates me deeply. But what are you going to do? But they have painted themselves into a corner, one that they don't even know how to come out of. And chances are, when some of them come out of that corner when they have to, they're not just going to come out of the corner. It's going to destroy their faith. And I think we're going to be better off with them having a destroyed faith than we are with them having the particular faith they have now.
I keep telling people like this that a gloss system was simply thrown at the text. And it wasn't like people knew what they were doing when translating these various manuscripts that we have, because so many things were lost. And the reconstruction models that we have today are very good. I keep telling people that we're probably only 20% there, and that seems like that's wonderful to me. Mm-hmm. But most people are, they're convinced that they have 100% truth concerning these manuscripts. And so this becomes a problem not just of theism, but also of atheism, because atheists are rejecting not a literate view of the manuscripts. And so right. I find that atheists are extremely illiterate just as much as theists are. And so right. As a linguist / translator, I find that most of our conversations about theology are abysmally ignorant. And so I would like for our atheists tonight to address those problems.
Can I say one more thing?
Go for
it. Another problem that I think is in a small way, an illustration of this is sometimes the light breaks through anyway. For example, the Protestant church has now known for a long time that the word translated repentance really only means to have a paradigm shift, to have a totally different way of thinking about something when you're looking at it. And that's what that word in the original Greek actually means. It's a reference to thinking differently. And even though they have learned this and adopted this and even preached this, most of them still teach and preach a concept of repentance that's based upon the old concept that it means deep regret and sorrow for sin and saying you're sorry and groveling before an angry God. When we already had discovered that the words they used to come up with that doctrine are this word repentance, and so it's so although they've even accepted in a sense one of these insights, it still hasn't affected their doctrine. They've just kind of tucked it in there as an additional cool point that they can make, and that to me shows me that that even to the degree that some of the insights that we're coming to be aware of the usage of these words in Koine Greek culture, even to the degree that it leaks in, doesn't seem to speak to them clearly.
When Jesus was talking about not repentance, but he was dealing with the term metanoia, and actually he wasn't dealing with the Greek at all. He was speaking the Aramaic.
Aramaic. Yeah.
But the translation of what Jesus said is actually very, very soft. In other words, he was simply trying to say, why don't you think about this?
Yes, exactly.
Rethink something.
Yes.
And so it was a very respectful way of saying, why don't you rethink it? Just think it through a little bit. But, when you hear someone standing on top of an atheist monument screaming out, repent, repent, the kingdom of God is at hand, I mean, you have to laugh. I do. When I hear people on the sides of the streets here in Pensacola, I just laugh. It's funny.
If Jesus were there, he'd say, what the hell are you doing?
He would. And so this brings me to my question about atheism and also theism. Theists, are making wrong decisions about theism because they are reading these models that are extremely failed. And my question is to the atheist here tonight, if you have been reading failed meta-language, how can you actually make a valid premise or a valid conclusion based upon something that's so failed?
Well, I think that when it comes to the scriptures for most atheists, if you were to try to explain to them that, well, the text has been misrepresented in its views on homosexuality, I don't think most would care.
Right.
Many of them see it as more of a modern, more compassionate reinterpretation of older documents that really have no bearing for them. We've already moved past needing these for any kind of reassurance or for any kind of justification for our actions. We have other things that we would rely on, and the most you get is, well, okay, that's interesting, but I don't, it has no bearing on the way I'm going to continue forward.
But don't you think that's a little narrow-minded? That there is a book that the majority of atheists probably detest and do not like its information. They do not want it to become any type of a law, which I understand that, and they don't want it to become any type of a worldview. But if you don't understand it as best as you possibly can, then I think what Dr. Jones is saying, you don't really have good information to use in your arguments. So why not try to understand it a little bit better?
Well, I think most atheists don't really get into arguments or will only argue with people who also have a fundamental view of it. Really, at that point, they don't care. A lot of people will have the view that, okay, you've reinterpreted the Bible to make it better fit with modern society.
No, that's not what we're talking about.
Well,
we're not talking about something that's to better fit the modern.
Right, I understand
that's what church people are doing. People are trying to fit a modern day scenario.
Right,
Linguists are trying to recreate a better history, and they're trying to be honest with what these people are saying, regardless of how it comes out.
Yeah,
because
and I understand that. What I'm saying
most people appreciated the idea of theology back in the day, not because a person wasn't called a theist years ago because they believed in God. They were called a theist, much like a person is called one who likes mythology, because mythology was extremely useful because you could teach people about behavior, etc. And so it's like psychology, it's very subjective, but yet it has its usefulness. And the
Well,
same
let-
thing is
let
true
me
with
ask you a question.
theology. Certainly.
What is the lesson? Is there a core understanding that someone can gain? I don't pretend to know the linguistics. I, definitely no expert on languages, but I'm always willing to, be educated on things.
Certainly.
But what is the message, or what is the, core thing that I could learn from this?
I think one of the things that we all can learn from better modeling of what we call some of these writings, and I'm not one who advocates the canon, because I think the worst thing that ever happened was when we took a bunch of books and squeezed them in between two covers and said, why don't you try to find some type of harmony within all of these writers? And honestly speaking, all of these writers are not even talking about the same gods. Some of them don't even believe in God. And this harmony idea of the Bible is a very deceptive thing. And so if you take away the front cover and the back cover and just look at the individual writings and the individual authors, some of these writers do say some meaningful things, like the Apostle Paul when he said, let me define for you love. He said love is kind, it's patient, it doesn't keep a record of wrongs. And so he starts talking about something that does impact me, that is, as a human being, it has impacted the way that my wife and I relate to each other. And so when Jesus came along, and this is rightly translated, he said, you've heard it said, that is in the Mosaic law, love your neighbors but hate your enemies. He said, I'm going to tell you something differently. You need to love both your neighbors and your enemies. And I think that's extremely useful, because if we don't start loving our neighbors and our enemies also, I don't think that we have a chance for world peace. And so there's something about the love factor within the context of many of these writers that I think that we need to pay attention to. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the things like the Sermon on the Mount, there is a massive amount of wisdom in that. If you take away the magical trappings of religion and get down to just what is being said, I have no problem with that. I don't necessarily agree with every statement that is made. I can't come up with an example off the top of my head, but it's so wrapped up.
But the hyperbole was created by the church, not the writers themselves.
Exactly.
However, some of the writers are guilty of lots of hyperbole, and I have the right, just like you
James.
have the right. Exactly, James is
Yeah.
full of
Terrible.
it, to say the least.
Yes.
But
Can I
Bob,
add something else on here?
certainly,
Dr.
go for it,
Jones?
Bob.
The one of the most difficult things that I find for me to do is I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. I want to, in some ways, defend the biblical text in terms of its usefulness, while at the same time, I need to take the position that the biblical text, properly translated, doesn't claim to be the inspired inerrant word of God, so that it's merely literature that was produced as a result of some of these events that occurred and has come down to us as a result of these events, and it represents in some ways some of the historical testimony, and as you said, of people who even understood this and viewed it very differently.
Right.
I cannot reconcile early Paul with late Paul. I can't reconcile any of Paul with James. I can see some moving towards each other with Peter and Paul. As I read it, because I'm not frozen in this concept that this is somehow an inerrant, coherent, cohesive word from God, So there's a sense in which this is the rock between the rock and the hard. How do you defend a text when people think that when you're defending it, you're trying to defend an authoritative
Right.
text?
Exactly.
Because I'm not. I don't consider it authoritative. I consider it perhaps authentic. That the people who write in it are at least being they're saying what they really think, you know.
You know.
But it's just personal opinions that we're reading here. And I gave you at one time my translation of 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy 3, that section there that is often the kingpin verse used to try and claim that the Bible is the Word of God.
Right.
And whereas that, when it's properly translated, you see it's really a shift from temple writings to talk about the usefulness of all literature.
Exactly.
And so it's just wrongly translated. So it does put us in a tough place because we're coming to a culture that has been wrongly taught that this is the inerrant Word of God, and it even claims to be so.
In fact, the Apostle Paul, when he was on Mars Hill, one of the things that he did was he didn't use the esoteric writings of his family members. He actually quoted from the poets. And so
Right.
what Bob is talking about when he's talking to young Timothy, this young man was, raised in fixed beliefs. And he encouraged young Timothy. He said, look at those sacred writings, but compare them to everything. In other words, in 2 Timothy chapter 15, he makes a contrast, a juxtaposition, if you will, between the sacred writings and looking at all literature. He
That's
encouraged young Timothy to go on and move into the arena of thinking that all books, in a sense, are equivalent. They're simply written by human beings, and they're all inspired in a sense. And so he never put the God term. He uses theopneustos not as a God-breathed idea, but simply as something that says we're all inspired. And whatever you want to call it, it is what it is. And so he was moving people forward. And so, as Bob was stating a few minutes ago, we've talked much on this, Paul was one in transition. Because when you start reading his epistles, you see him saying one thing, but by the time that you see the later epistles that he wrote, he had changed much in every way. It's just like science. In other words, he's growing, he's evolving. And why can't we, as human beings, appreciate people like that? For instance, when I study the works of Aristotle, the translation models that are out there concerning Aristotle are much different than what I read in the text itself. I'd much rather read Aristotle in the original context than to read something in English concerning Aristotle. And the same thing is true with Plato. And these two versions of Plato, Aristotle, and the rest of these guys they're just not one and the same in this, because we have synthetic modeling, not just of the Bible, but of all kinds of ancient writers. And so this is a huge problem. And so how can we gain from this? I think that all of us will agree that we can learn from history. We can learn from the past. People had various ideas that are very useful for us today. And it's not just the love factor, but it's how people can move and make progress and transition, if that makes sense to you.
Dr. Jones, you've
Yes.
probably read a general course in linguistics, Ferdinand de Saussure, right?
Certainly.
Of course, it was originally written in German, and there are different translations of it out there. And I found that, boy, it's a radically different read depending on which translation you're reading. And I can see some of the tension between people who would say be leaning in some sort of divisive way toward Edward Sapir versus Noam Chomsky. And you see radical differences. So even for us as linguists, we're finding that unless you're going to read in German, there's going to even be trouble trying to read some of the foundational works of modern linguistics.
Now, this is one of the reasons that I want to do several shows on the deictic centers, because that's a very interesting study, number one. And number two, what linguists are saying about deictic centers and what philosophers are doing with it are two different things. And so this has to do with the world of what we call indexicality, which we'll get into on another show. But my point is, and I wanted to make this point, is it better for us to be honest about our past and what people said in the past? And if we appreciate, say, a point from Paul or Aristotle, Plato, or whoever, why can't we be willing enough to say, let's put aside our differences? In other words, whether I believe in God or not, that's superfluous. If this is a powerful point, it just is.
Yeah.
Right.
In other words, why can't we put that, possibly on public property, just as, side by side with someone who isn't a theist or whatever? I mean,
We could do that, Dr. Jones, so long as we don't have people like Eric Hovind and Cy Ten Bruggencate jumping on top of monuments, ruining other people's heyday.
Well, not
I
even them. I
suppose.
mean,
I
You know,
agree with that.
There people are
Well, not even
jamming
them.
the Bible down people's throats, thinking that they're doing God's service, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'd say it's not even them that's really the problem. The problem is the religious right in the U.S. They're
Yeah.
the ones who are using things like the motto being "In God We Trust" to force a Christian message across the political spectrum. The Democrats recently got rid of God from their platform, which I kind of like. That would represent me better. They were forced to put it back on, both by commentary from the religious right and other people. And that was earlier. I was not saying that the idea that you're reinterpreting it in a modern society is right. That's just what most atheists would look at it as. Like you have the Catholic Church finally admitting that slavery was wrong in 1965, not with good biblical, to me at least, not with good biblical backing. They just base it off of the commandment, "Thou shalt not steal." So that would be the point of view of some atheists, is that it's just you're reinterpreting your values based on or your interpretation of the Bible based off of modern society. That's not right, but that would be the look of it.
I wonder what David Barton thinks about some of these quotes from Thomas Jefferson.
He ignores them. Yeah,
Do you know who David Barton is?
yeah, he's a revisionist who is
Oh,
trying
my.
to make the idea that the U.S. is actually a Christian nation. He's
If
severely
you read
discredited.
some of his stuff, he's insane.
Yep. Well, that's why he works well with David Cameron.
Yeah.
One of the things that we can do, and I'd love to see this done, if you want to stop the religious right, and we're talking about an extremely disingenuous group of people who will go to the lengths of what Eric Hovind and Cy Ten Bruggencate do. If you want to stop them, I think that atheists need to support linguists, whether they be a theist or an atheist, because linguists can actually speak proficiently concerning their text. And if you want to shut down something, you need to shut it down with the kind of intellectual honesty that comes with linguistic honesty, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what,
I absolutely
Dr.
agree
Jones?
with that.
Yeah.
Being able to, put back into their lap what they are saying in the way that it was originally and appropriately said, not their misinterpretation, that's the best way to win an argument.
Right.
The problem is that the people that we are arguing against, Eric Hovind jumping up on top of that, that monument, he did it because he is absolutely convinced he is right and we are wrong, because he has been pounded into his head for so long. It's not that he is being disingenuous. That's what he believes. And that's the problem, is that belief is so deep, mistaken as it may be, but it's there. He's not doing it to be a dishonest person. He's doing it because he believes it.
When you're dealing with people like the person in Texas who, in response to trying to get a Spanish education program put into schools, who makes a statement that, well, if English was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for us, I don't think you'll be able to get a well-reasoned, intellectually honest argument across, especially since some of these people are actively anti-intellectual.
Very much so.
But I do think that, you can educate a community away from that kind of nonsense. It's true that you do have these ambulance chasers. They're looking for photo ops. And I think that if atheists would quit giving them the photo ops and start simply saying, we're going to go back into the classrooms, we're going to go back into the places where, true linguistics are going on. And this is the evidence that we're looking at. And this is how foolish you look standing out there jumping up and down on some monument. I think that will stop it. I think that as long as we pay attention to these people who are making a buttload of money off of what's happening, and you're always going to have a handful of common people who are not well-read who will support those kind of movements. But if you start more of a movement of educating the people, you know, this is what the text actually says, I think it will change all of us. And so this is why the New Covenant group is what it is. It's trying to get atheists and theists to work together, because the evidence is what it is.
Yeah.
We need to both look at, you know, the evidence together and say, let's work together, let's move forward together. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to walk down the road together and move forward together, because at the end of the day, the facts will win. And so
I do think we should take a bet on which monument will receive the first spray of graffiti first.
I know where my money's going.
Yeah, I'm more optimistic. Some people, I think it's going to be left untouched for at least a month.
You think so?
Yeah.
I think it'll be beyond graffiti.
Yeah. I'm afraid I'm wrong.
I'm afraid
but
it will
I'd
be,
like to be more optimistic.
wow.
Yeah, I hope it can stand. You know, and particularly if the goal is to put these monuments up in juxtaposition to the other more religious monuments as a way of trying to bring overall balance in the monuments present, I think that's a great idea. I'd be probably maybe it'll lead to the removal of all of them, but
That's the goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the goal of the atheist monuments.
And I
oh
believe the
really?
statement was-
Okay,
That
that makes
is the goal.
sense. That's a good strategy.
Can you repeat
So,
that? I didn't
Are you
get that.
saying to have the Christian monument removed and then the atheist monument removed as well?
No, I'm saying that by putting these monuments up, they provide a balance, but it could end up being a provocative balance, that the only way to properly resolve it is to remove both monuments.
Yeah.
Wasn't the
You know.
statement made that if the Christian monument was removed, so would the atheist
Yeah.
monument?
Yeah, you gotta
with
get
all
rid of
50
both of them.
Yeah.
If there's gonna be a matter of contention, you gotta get rid of both of them.
Yeah. If the if the statement was that if the Christians will take down the Ten Commandments, the American atheists will remove their monuments as well. That
Do you know how
the-
many Christians don't know that the Ten Commandments come in two different versions, and that the one that they use is
Yep.
not the version that claims to be kept by God? You know?
Oh, look at the
it's
Catholics. They
weird.
removed they actually removed the commandment, "Thou shalt not create any graven images." Just flat out removed it.
Yeah.
For
Are you
some
suggesting that
particular
we
reason.
needed to have goat milk out at that venue? It's a tragedy. It is a tragedy.
Let's, well, I want to say that William Langell, he said when you guys were talking about Paul, he said it's so true that Paul's views evolved. Great stuff. And that's one reason that I really believe, well, I do obviously believe in Jesus, a historical Jesus, but there was something that went on in Paul's life between the time he was this Christian killer and, law spouter, till he just did, this 180 and became such a loving and tolerant person. And something happened in his life, and I just happen to believe it was an encounter with Jesus. I really do.
I mean, one day we have the recordings of this man named Shaul, and the only reason that he's called Shaul or Saul of Tarsus, it's because Luke is trying to spin him to the Jewish culture, because this was the name that he received on the 8th day, that is, of his circumcision. But when you
He was
see
an up-and-comer in their culture, too, and they knew him as Shaul of Tarsus. He sat at the feet of Gamaliel, right? So, I mean, he's an he was the shining star. They were expecting great things to come from him.
Exactly, but
And then,
But
ooh.
when you see the paradigm shift as quick as it did, one day a killer, a major killer at that, and then the next day he's writing things like, love is patient, kind, doesn't keep a record of wrongs, you would have to applaud that. I mean, I don't know of any psychologist that would look at that picture and say, wow, that's not impressive. And so there are some useful writings that we can find ancient writings, and I wouldn't argue that these are all found within the biblical text. I think that some of the biblical texts are horrible. I would renounce them. For instance, when it comes to Elijah cursing the 42 children and God sending 2 sheep bearers to maul them to death, I think that's deplorable. I think the story of Noah and the ark is also a sick story. It comes from not
Genocide of the
yeah.
Midianites and all that.
You know,
Right.
it doesn't come from, the
Infanticide.
Hebrew-speaking people. It actually came from the Ugaritic tablets. And so you have many things that are plagiarized, but genuine linguists who are honest are putting these things back together, reconstructing them, and showing how disingenuous many of these texts are. Now, I don't know about you, but that will change the game dramatically for the church world, for everyone's world. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's plenty of information out there for people to see, the parallels between the epics of Gilgamesh and, the Old Testament, Noah's flood, and so forth. That information is out there. It's somewhat accessible. I think what you're talking about, though, is a level of education to people that aren't able to comprehend that level of education. I mean, personally, a lot of what you're discussing is beyond, my grasp. I have no formal education. I am a 10th grade high school dropout. What education I have is, what I've, gleaned on my own. I'm always willing to admit that I am wrong if I can be shown that. I go with where the evidence is. That's why I am an atheist. I don't see any evidence for a, divine presence. Historical evidence of a great person, possibly. I have, I can't say that, Jesus did or didn't exist. I don't know. I haven't seen any actual evidence. Perhaps, you could convince me otherwise with the actual linguistics, with actually studying the texts. And I would be more than happy to, understand that, to read it, to find a way to understand it. But I can't get over the mystical barrier. I don't have to have something outside of physical reality to give my life meaning.
One of the New Testament writers made this comment. He said that Jesus emptied himself of all of the God notions. And to me, that was powerful. When I read that and understood it from the Greek text, Jesus emptying himself. He did not want people to perceive him to be any type of theos, if you will, a God type, because people had built so many different models of God. He was more than content just being a human being and trying to get us to connect with our humanity. In fact, if you study the writings of Jesus, you're going to find that he's trying not to get people into heaven or to get them to escape from hell, because those are simply, failed understandings of the text. He's simply trying to get people to focus in on how to love one another and embrace each other.
I think where my question is more not in the, differences in the actual Christian theology and so forth. What I'm asking for is explain to me where theism differs from supernatural belief. What is not supernatural about believing in a supreme divine being of some sort?
I think you're asking a valid point. Let's have you back and deal with that question, because we're running close to the end of the program, and I want to cover a little bit more territory. But would you come back and let's deal with that
I'd be
particular
happy to.
question?
Thank you.
Because the thing that I love about atheists, it's most of the atheists that we're meeting are patient. They're wanting to learn. And we here at the New Covenant Group, that's what we enjoy doing most. We love hearing as many questions as we can, because, if I can't question my faith, if I can't question my experiences, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so, all of us here, and I think that you can tell that with all of us, we want truth. We don't want to hold on to a fixed belief. And so I think that you're asking a wonderful question that needs to be addressed. I'm not certain that I could answer it in 5 or 10 minutes. In other words, the kind of question that you just asked actually wins a debate. In other words, the way that you win a debate is to ask a question that requires about 10 hours worth of answer, okay? And so you ask one of those questions. I think that I could do a fairly decent job if we started out the show with that question. And so let's do that soon. Yeah, Bob, did you have any comments on that point?
Yeah, the whole word, supernatural, tries to dominate the natural. It's not just, we're not talking about the natural, we're talking about the supernatural. I really think it's better to talk about the material and the immaterial reality. There's a sense in which it's not the super reality. It's just I think that a theist is someone who, such as myself, is somebody who perceives the material world and the immaterial reality as coexisting, and I don't see one as necessarily having to be so super to the other. So the word supernatural is a charged, provocative, hyperbolic word, just to begin with.
I'm happy to withdraw the term supernatural.
Yeah.
What I'm asking for is a better understanding of what you refer to as an immaterial reality.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it'd be great to bring the subject up again. We just have a few minutes it's all a whole show on its own, but it's worth pursuing. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think that it's a compelling argument.
It's like dealing with the subject of logic. Is logic material or immaterial? In other words, if I asked you to go out in the backyard and dig up a bucket of logic, could you do it?
Well,
I was trying to give a pun. Nobody got the pun. I mean, come on, somebody laugh. I mean, come on, let's hear it. Yay.
Yay, fun.
Okay. I'm trying to be funny here. Okay, I didn't want to end the show without showing these photographs again. I said that I would return to the topic, and I want to really nuance what's going on. And I want to ask of theists and atheists alike, whatever you do in life, learn to be respectful, learn to be kind, learn to be honest, learn to be compassionate. We have some extremely ignorant people out there, and you can inflame them to do worse things than they're doing right now. And I don't think the answer is to provoke them. I think the answer is to help them. If I have mental illness, I need to be hospitalized. That may need to be done here, I don't know. But my point is, let's be kind. Let's look at these pictures once again. And my wife needs to make a statement. Go for it, honey.
I think both of, or all three of these guys, I guess Eric and Cy jumped on the atheistic monument, and then David Silverman did the Christian monument. I think if they, all three of them would have taken the high road, if Eric and Cy would have been there and not maybe just supporting them, but saying, free speech is a great thing. It's a good place to come together. If they would have done that, I would have said kudos to you, to them. But then if David Silverman would have, after he saw them jumping on that monument, if he would have not jumped on the other one, he would have really earned some brownie points. This is just me personally saying. So they had an opportunity to do the right thing and to show people a better side of where they're coming from. And they all three failed, in my opinion.
I respect that, because any time that you, act the same way that a fool acts, it's hard to tell the difference. And
Right. And I'm like Bob, too. When you're provoked, you just don't know what might come out sometimes.
now, I'm like David Silverman. I probably would have reacted.
Well, I hope not, honey.
Well, I hope not. I understand your point, but I'm not beyond reacting.
It's a testosterone thing.
Possibly. Possibly so. Let's show the first slide again, Sean. Okay, this is the one with Cy 10 Bruggencate pulling on the toilet seat. I think he's wanting his argument back.
Like, who would have wanted to touch it to start with? I mean, it could have been something out of an old trailer house that somebody just, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Gross.
What was the intent of the toilet seat? Did you not say that he was trying to put it on top?
Well,
of-
I don't know what his goal with it was. The claim was that the bench looks like a toilet. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I know.
Okay.
I guess if they think that looks like a toilet, they have some personal problems.
Yeah, no, I don't see that.
But
Wow, okay.
that is why that it was thrown at us, was because of the comments on it. And I do want to say there were theists in attendance who were very respectful, who were supporting of the monument and supporting of free speech as well. And some of them did want the Ten Commandments to be taken down as well.
That's great. All right, what about the, show the one with Eric Hovind acting a fool on top of it. There you go. So I just want to get a picture of this crowd. They say that there was about 200 people in attendance, and I don't know how many were there to, for the unveiling of the atheist monument, or how many were there to counter protest, I should say. Could you get a feel for that, Michael? Do you know what the ratio was between atheists and Christians there?
There were definitely more atheists. I actually made the comment that, the protesters don't have the staying power anymore. It used to be, they would be out, there would be numerous people out protesting. And it could be, on one hand, they've finally realized that them protesting gives us more, well, I say us, but gives American atheists and others more media coverage. And quite often they do not represent themselves well on television. I know about that personally. But I'm not sure, like what happened the other day at Pride Fest. Usually those protesters would be there the entire time. However, they were there for an hour or two and then left. And I'm not sure if it might be they realize their viewpoints are no longer valid.
Have you ever seen anyone at any of these venues actually repent and get saved according to their methods?
No, I have seen people who will interact with these preachers and will say, well, what do I have to do to, come around to your point of view?
Now,
And
there is one gentleman, can you show this one? I think he becomes polemic with Hovind.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like he's just trying to get a rise out of people instead of
Yeah.
trying to, reason with them. And it seems like people are just getting angry and clashing.
Well, the Hovind and Cy and the other people in the audience who were doing the same thing, they were not there to actually try to convert people or to have a reasoned, friendly conversation. They were there with the intention of getting people who were not familiar with who they are or their arguments to trick them with what they were saying, and to drive and to get reactions like that. Most of the people there were friendly, would realize the conversation was a trap or would not be going anywhere, and left the conversation. They were looking for those few people who would get angry and start getting into an argument with them, because they will take those videos, they will edit them, and then show them to their audience saying, see, these
Oh.
atheists are so angry.
Yeah, we know. We know.
I agree.
We've been bitten by that bug.
Randy, I want you to tell us what has this conversation done for you tonight? Anything good, bad?
Well, I've actually enjoyed it very much. I've never really had the opportunity to speak at any length with somebody who identifies strictly as a theist. I find your views very interesting. I find Bob's views very interesting. I'm always willing to learn. That's, basically that's my whole goal in life, is to increase my knowledge.
That's
You know,
wonderful.
You have to admire that.
I don't necessarily mean that I'm going to agree with you.
Well-
But if there's anything, evidentiary that, shows me to be wrong in something that I believe, I'm willing to change.
One of the things that we don't practice here, we don't like to convert anyone. We're just interested in sharing, what we think to be true. Now, how that impacts you is, another point, in other words.
Well, that's very honorable, because that's something that you don't have the opportunity to do with, say a hardcore Baptist or something like that. They
Right.
don't want to speak, usually. I can't say, I don't want to broad brush it, but they generally don't want to speak and listen to your views, and they don't want to explain theirs.
Right.
Theirs, in most cases, they see it as, well, it's so obvious, it's right there in the Bible, you don't understand it, you're an idiot.
Right. You're talking to someone who doesn't believe that Jesus died for your sins. You're talking to someone who simply believes that he was murdered. You're talking to someone who doesn't believe that we needed to have any kind of atonement. We don't need to satisfy some father somewhere who could not forgive us without having the shedding of blood. We don't believe any of those things. We think that's a very ill way of living, and it would be very disturbing to be around a father like that. I would want to go to heaven if there is this Father in the sky who demanded of his Son to go and die for my sins, in other words. And so maybe after you get to know us, you'll understand where we're coming from. We're not trying to persuade anyone to be like us. We're simply wanting to have these wonderful conversations. This is the reason that we like Michael so much. He's very honest, open, and he keeps reading, and we encourage that because he's a brilliant young man, and he has a lot to put on the table, and I think that in the years to come, he will have much, much more to put on the table of discussion, and we certainly appreciate that. But we thank you so much for coming our way tonight, Randy. It was wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. I
And
enjoyed it.
Michael, your closing thoughts, please.
Well, I'll respectfully disagree with your assessment of me, but my closing thoughts on this topic. One of the things I found is that when I'm with a crowd of atheists, there are many, many people who enjoy having conversation, who enjoy having their ideas questioned, who I've been at meetings where we will stay as close to closing time as the owners will let us, and then we'll be standing outside, not arguing, but just discussing different ideas of things that we would normally not have the opportunity to. We'll be wrong or we'll be right, and more often than not, when someone's wrong, they'll say, yeah, I guess I'm wrong. I've been with many different types of theists over the years. In fact, one of the times when I was still a theist, I was having a conversation with someone, and as it happened, he was a follower of Kent and Eric Hovind. And I was just saying, I don't really see the Bible's creation story to be satisfying with all the understanding we have of science and of history. And I was automatically labeled an atheist, an unbeliever, and someone who was untrustworthy. And this was someone who I had a good friendship with, who we had spent a lot of time together. We were doing martial arts together, and that's how it ended. That ability to have a conversation on ideas, and
Right.
The idea that maybe I'm wrong and let's talk this out, was not available.
Now, I wanted to do something tonight, and this is going to catch somebody off guard. I'm going to pull the microphone out of my stand, and I'm going to ask Jack to come over here. Jack, would you come up here for a minute? Yeah, I want you to say something. This guy helps us out here at the studio all the time. He's a wonderful individual. And my wife's going to get up for a moment,
Yeah,
and you
I
can
don't
sit
mind.
down.
I'm good.
She's going to come right back. I mean, she's
Maybe not.
well, okay.
Uh-oh. Now, I don't
No,
want to run
she-
nobody off.
she-
I don't
she's
wanna
gonna come
run nobody
back.
off now. I don't want to run nobody off.
Pull the microphone up to
Okay.
you.
I just want to say hello. Yes, I do hang around the studio here quite a bit and try to help out. And as you see, camera in hand, try to take some pictures and do some video and see if I can help out some here. I'm glad to be a part of the group. And so,
Now, you're an atheist, and you're so
Well,
kind
yeah.
and awesome. And what makes you so good?
well, that's I guess that opinion would be subjective because I just try to treat people right. It's like you were talking here on your show about the person who was trying to let the pregnant lady sit down. That would have been the proper thing to do, and so, to offer for her to sit down. And then when the person refused to let her do that, then I didn't think that was quite right. And so I'm the type like that person. I will offer to help somebody. I think would be the proper thing to do.
Well, that's why we like you so much and we love you so much.
Same
Thank
here,
you,
Dr.
thank you,
Johnson.
Jack, for coming up
no
here.
No problem. And so just hope I didn't break your camera.
I don't think you did. Bob, what are your closing thoughts tonight?
Very, very useful discussion, I think. I'm so glad that that at least here we are having discussions where we're talking about these things. And I got to tell you that, there was a day when I was a fundamentalist and felt this obtuse need to be some sort of a purist. And certainly things have changed. I can't imagine me not remaining friends with someone like Michael Fulford just because we had a disagreement about theology or concepts of God. In fact, hearing him say that he was doing karate, I used to teach karate. I can't think of any better reason for us to be friends than the fact that we can chit-chat and talk. And I like the openness of ideas. I think it's important that we do that. And I think that there needs to be a freedom to reach the conclusions that we are comfortable finding coherent while remaining open in discussion with others who are in no manner obligated to think the same way we do. And so I like the fact that we can have this conversation. And I would say this, that if a person finds being an atheist the most reasonable thing they can do, that is what they need to be. And they should never change from that unless they find a meaningful, workable, and coherent reason to do otherwise. And it's just,
Right.
it's the only way you can take responsibility for being yourself.
We have Alan and Sean, and I want both of them to come up here. Let them take my seat, okay?
Well, then
Uh,
you can't sit in your seat.
You can sneak up behind them. Okay, Sean, come on up here and take my chair. I want you guys to give closing statements and tell us why you guys hang around the studio and do all these marvelous things. I want Bob and everybody else to get to know you guys. You guys are awesome.
I'm feeling
Sean-
kind of threatened that we're outnumbered atheists.
Look at all these
versus
atheists. Sean,
theists.
come sit in my chair.
Scurry.
We're surrounded by Indians. We,
That's
Kimasabi.
Pale face. Eeny, meeny,
Do you want
miny,
to
moe.
start with me first? Okay. What do you want to know? The reason why I like coming here? Why am I here? It's filled with great people, and I believe in the concept of finding a common ground between atheists and theists, and I believe in the concept of that we're all going to be here and we're all going to have different opinions, but I believe in the conversation has to go on. So that's what I like about here.
Camera. Oh, there it is. Let's get myself a little shorter. There we go.
Now, this is our welder, Bob. When you get to watch this on YouTube, this is the guy that's been welding our jibs and stuff like that. And so he's awesome. And Randy, you need to show everyone your mug. I mean, that's wonderful.
That is a lot of drink.
Oh, you've definitely
I used to
got
have one of
Bob
those.
beat. Bob has a great big red and green cup, but I think you've got Bob Graves beat with that 64-ouncer.
Let's see. The reason why I'm here.
There it is.
I also enjoy the discussion that we can agree to disagree, but we're still friends, more or less.
Oh,
Well said.
we're friends because we're people.
Yeah.
Right.
You want me to try and remember it, or? Okay, let's see.
I've got it somewhere.
Some of us theists, some of us atheists, some of us not so sure. All of us human, each of us unique.
To come together.
To come together to grow in discussion, I think it was.
Well, I have it right here. You're almost right. Some of us theists, some of us atheists, some of us not so sure. All of us human, each of us unique, to come together as a community of individuals to grow in discussion.
Sounds about right.
That's powerful. That's
Here, here,
wonderful.
that's great.
It really
It
is.
is.
That's amazing.
It really is. Brilliant. Recognized.
I apologize,
Well-
I was not expecting to be on.
We have a phone going off, and it's just out of control. We're out of time tonight. We've had a wonderful time. And honey, why don't you close us out?
All right, well, I want to make two quick viewer comments because they were funny, actually. That was one reason I want to say them. One comment is, did the toilet seat hurt anyone? And then maybe the fundamentalists were trying to throw their beliefs at the atheists, but got confused and threw a toilet seat instead. It's an easy mistake to make, you know.
Yeah.
So I thought
No,
that
yeah.
was really funny.
Yeah,
So,
fortunately, they completely missed to hit the side of the building instead.
well, that's a terrible
Yeah.
thing to do,
Thank
I
they
guarantee
can't
you.
even hit the broadside of a barn.
Now, Wednesday, come back on Ustream and be with us for the Unconventional Pastor at 7 p.m. with Bob Graves. And then at 8 p.m., we will have a Google Hangout again. We don't know the topic yet. And then our producer wants to say something. Clash Course.
Just wondering why you're doing my job. So, I think that I'm going to talk to my union leader about this.
Sorry.
Go ahead, finish up. Tell him. Tell him all about it. Go ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. The New Covenant Group is atheists and theists together, and I'm mad at every single one of them. Join us next Wednesday for the Unconventional Pastor and Dr. Jones to follow, and then Sunday we do this all over again from 10 to 10 all day long, starting with Dr. Jones, actually starting with Alan Darley with Good Reasons to Believe, then Dr. Jones, then William T. Langill, and Reflections with Rhonda Jones, my very own nanny, who's trying to take my job tonight. And following that, we have The Beginnings of Greatness with myself and Matthew. And then What Would Love Do? And then Clash Course with myself and Greg Bray, talking once again about polygamy versus monogamy. And then after that, Inspiring Honesty, The Unconventional Pastor, and then here we go again at 8 o'clock in the evening with The Place. We hope you'll be there, and until next time, we love you.